Welcome. Ve Sayın Joseph Nye ödülünü
to present his award, the award to Professor Joseph Nye, I'd like to invite the chair of the Board of Trustees, Güler Sabancı, and rector of Sabancı University, Yusuf Leblevici, please. I'd like to invite you on stage to present the award.
Evet, çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you very much.
Bir fotoğraf için size hep birlikte
A photo, please.
Sayın Güler Sabancı ve Sayın Yusuf
Thank you very much to Ms. Sabancı and Mr. Leblevici. Now we will listen to the speech by Joseph Nye.
Let me repeat what I said in that little film, that it is truly a great honor to be honored by a great university, and to be here at Sabancı University and to receive this award is very much a highlight. But let me also say that I was delighted by the younger scholars and their presentation and awards. I had the good luck, my friend Meltem had already sent me the papers that these scholars had written. I didn't know them, but I marked to my wife Molly, who is here with me, and who you saw in many of those pictures. These are very good papers. So Sabancı has a wonderful younger generation to be proud of. Now, I sometimes, when people say that they've read my books, I'm reminded of the fact that I'm not sure whether that's something I should apologize for or not. My father never graduated from high school, and he did all right in life, and he used to say he loved my books because he read one page before going to bed every evening, and it didn't matter which page, it worked perfectly well. So when people say, oh, I love your books, I'm not quite sure what they mean. The other thing that I'm often asked by students, who I gather there are a number here tonight, Sabancı students, is, I'm not sure what I want to do when I grow up. I'm puzzled about what I'm going to do. And I often reply to them, don't worry about it. I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, or even whether I'm grown up. Life is full of surprises, and if there's any wisdom that I've accumulated over time, is that you should follow your curiosity and your intellectual interests, and just keep true to your own self and your own integrity, and then things will turn out. So don't worry too much whether you know the plan or what's going to happen at the end. I'll give you a few biographical details of what those surprises are like and the importance of what you might call serendipity or surprises in life. When I was a senior in college at Princeton University, I ran into a professor in the library, and he said, Nye, what are you doing next year? And I said, I'm going to go into the Marines. At that time, all young Americans had to serve 2 years in the military. And he said, no, don't do that. He said, you should apply for a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford. So I did, and I won it, and I wound up spending the next 2 years at Oxford instead of in the Marine Corps. And when I was at Oxford, I had a friend who was from Africa, from Ghana, and he and I would sit long in the evenings debating the question of whether Africa would become democratic or not. He was assured that it would. I hoped that it would. In many cases, African countries have not been able to preserve democracy. But it got me so interested in the question that I went and did my PhD research in Africa. And I didn't know what I was going to do after I finished my PhD research, but I thought maybe I would go into the State Department or do something international. And as I was standing on the lawn at the East African Institute of Social Research in Kampala, Uganda, I was handed an envelope, and it came from Harvard, and they said, "We'd like to offer you a job as an assistant professor, starting at the magnificent salary of $7,000. And I thought, well, I'll try it for a little while. I had no idea the little while would take so long. And then, eventually, I was invited to go into the State Department to work in the Carter administration. So my idea of working in the State Department did occur, but not at all in the way I expected it to occur. So the reason that I mentioned all this is that as you do your work as a student, as you try to plan your future, be aware that you can't control everything. What you can control is your own intellectual curiosity and your own sense of integrity. If you keep those, somehow the rest of it will work out, and you don't have to worry too much about how you'll turn out. There's a famous American theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr who developed a prayer that has become known as the Serenity Prayer. And it says, "Lord, give me the serenity to accept that which I cannot change, and the courage to change that which I can change, and the wisdom to know which is which." If you keep that in mind, then things will work out all right. Now let me say a word or two about soft power and what it means and what it might mean for Turkey. People often say, you know, how did you come upon the idea of soft power? And in fact, it was sitting at the kitchen table writing in longhand about a book that I was trying to explain why I didn't think that the United States was in decline. At that time, it was very fashionable in 1990 to say that the Americans were finished, a little bit like Philip II Spain. And that there was my colleague and friend Paul Kennedy, who wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, and he predicted that the Americans were finished. And I thought there was something wrong with this, so I totaled up sort of the American military power, and I looked at the American economic power. I said, but there's something missing in terms of explaining what's happening in the world, and that's the ability to get what you want, not through military or economic coercion or payment, but through attraction. A lot of what we do when we talk about power, which is the ability to get others to do the things we want, we do through attraction. Very few of us spend our lives going around beating other people over the head or paying them to do what we want. We actually rely all the time upon attraction. And that's what I call soft power, that ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion and payment. Now, unfortunately, in international politics, we haven't spent enough time on the importance of attraction. But over the long term, it makes a huge difference. In that sense, I think the thing that intrigued me most after I'd written this book and developed this term soft power to explain this extra or third dimension of power, what intrigued me was in 2007, President Hu Jintao, the president of China, told the 17th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, China needs to invest more in its soft power. And China is indeed now working very hard to increase its soft power. And indeed, under President Xi Jinping, they've inserted the term soft power into the constitution of the Chinese Communist Party. Now that's very interesting because it's a long way from my kitchen table, writing in longhand when the president of the largest country in the world decides that that's going to be part of their party constitution. But the problem I think that we have to ask is not whether soft power can solve all of the world's issues. It can't. Power has dimensions of hard power, which are very important. But what worries me is that people too often think only about the hard power dimensions and not enough about soft power. And soft power derives for countries out of their culture when it's attractive to others, out of their values when they are attractive to others and when people practice what they preach, and out of their policies when their policies are seen as legitimate in the eyes of others. And I'm unhappy right now that in the United States, we have a president who talks about America first and doesn't invest in the State Department or the Agency for International Development, and who downplays multilateral institutions and alliances. The net effect of this is if you look at international public opinion polls, you'll see that American soft power, our attractiveness, has declined quite severely over the last 2 years. Now, that's unfortunate because it's bad for the United States, but it also sets a bad example for other countries. Of course, when a president says America first, a president is elected to protect his or her own people. But there's a difference between putting your country first and putting your country above all others and not thinking in a long-term way of how you incorporate the interests of others. So I believe that the key to this is to have a broad, far-sighted view of what it means to have a national interest and to apply it in world politics. And I fear that right now we're going through a rough spell, particularly in the United States. However, there may be some good news here in the following sense. As I mentioned in that little film, a great deal of a country's attractiveness or soft power doesn't come just from what the government does. It comes from the civil society of the country. And that can often compensate for the government's actions. For example, in the 1960s, the United States was wildly unpopular around the world because of its policies in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was bringing people out in the streets marching against the United States all over. But the thing that is most interesting to me is that these marchers in the street did not sing the Communist Internationale of North Vietnam. They sang, "We Shall Overcome," which was, of course, identified with Martin Luther King, which grew out of American civil society. So the fact that American civil society was producing values and culture which could attract people despite the fact that the government was doing terrible, unpopular things, that allowed Americans to recover their soft power, so that by the 80s, the United States was once again attractive. I hope we'll see the same thing happening in a few years. But let me then turn to Turkey and soft power. Turkey is an extremely important country. If you think about where Turkey stands in the world, it's really at the hinge of three great issues and cultures. Turkey is part of Europe, Turkey is part of the Middle East and the Islamic world, Turkey is part of the Turkic world, which stretches across all of Central Asia. So Turkey is, in a sense, a hinge for many, many great important cultural issues. Now, it has the bad fortune to be located in a difficult neighborhood. Some difficult things have happened next door. It's also had some bad luck with how things have happened at home. But I would say that if Turkey were to think about how it will look to its own future, soft power has to play a major role. If Turkey asks, can we control the world? Can we have a big influence through our military or economic power? Of course you need military and economic power. But if you ask, can Turkey attract people throughout the Muslim world, throughout the Turkic culture world, can attract people from Europe, that gives Turkey an amazingly important role. And thinking in terms of soft power, which used to be popular in Turkish foreign policy a decade or so ago, but seems to have ebbed and had little attention in recent years, I think Turkey will need to return to that in terms of the way it thinks about its own future. If I'm correct about the importance of Turkey, then I think Turkey will be using soft power again. And if I ask where will the soft power come from, going back to that example I used about how the United States recovered after the Vietnam War, I suspect that a lot of it's going to come from Turkish culture, including Turkish universities, and the excellence of Sabancı University and the type of work that Sabancı University is doing to preserve academic freedom and intellectual integrity. Those are going to be very important for Turkish soft power in the future. So what I would say in accepting this reward with deep gratitude is let us all think ahead to the important role that Turkey will play using its soft power again someday, and let us think with particular gratitude to the role of Sabancı University in preserving academic freedom and intellectual integrity that will make that possible. So again, my thanks to all of you for this great honor and award, and my best wishes and hopes for the future of Turkey and Sabancı University. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nye, could you please just stay on the stage, Mr. Nye? Mr. Nye. Evet, Mr. Nye ile birlikte bir aile fotoğrafı için efendim törenimiz.
I'd like to invite the award winners, jury members, and presenters of the awards for a family photograph with Professor Nye.